some authors and journalists and commentators have said this was a professional hit by the way that the gun was held to the skull and all the rest of it. Yeah. This wasn't by some local weirdo who wouldn't have done that. He would have just got a firearm from a local drug dealer somewhere, walked up to her and pulled the trigger.
In the early... I mean, it's absolutely clear that in the early parts of the investigation, one of the prime leads was that this was not one man acting alone, but there were possibly three, and a Range Rover involved. It was the suggestion a Range Rover had been seen in various situations. There were lots of movements of men seen running and that sort of thing.
The famous man in the trilby.
Indeed, the man in the trilby, the sweating man, the running man, and so forth. All of these things seemed to gel into a picture of a hit, of a professional hit with a car picking somebody up and sweeping them away. Maybe something went wrong slightly, but they all disappeared. And of course, you tie that together with the nature of the hit itself, of the murder itself, with as we say, the gun to the head and the sort of clinical quality to it, the calm quality to the killer as he was seen leaving the scene. All that, lended weight to the scenario. I have to say that there are other scenarios which I think ought to be considered too. One of the things about Barry George is he was a very strange man, but there is absolutely no evidence that he had any interest in Jill Dando. I say he took many photographs of women, of places, so forth around him. There are no photographs in this great file of the street where she lived, of Jill Dando, of anybody connected with her.
The other significant point that I want to bring up with you as well is that at the time she was spending a lot of time with her boyfriend, and she wasn't really living effectively in Gowan Avenue, and this was just a one-off, by-chance return to her home for some reason. And therefore, if it was a professional hit, maybe the professional hitmen would have arrived at the conclusion that, well, she doesn't live there, she lives somewhere else, and we'll do it there, which sort of lends a bit more weight to the Barry George thesis. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that it's always been one of the perplexing aspects of the case, that either somebody knew she was going to be there at 11:30 on that day, and the number of people, so far as the police were able to establish, who knew that was very, very small, 2 or 3. And they were all eliminated from the investigation, or somebody waited. Now, the evidence of people waiting, you'd think somebody would be bound to see twitching curtains. This is a narrow street. Somebody would be bound to see, but nobody was seen waiting.
No, it was a typical sort of English suburban central London street, wasn't it? You seem to be sort of arriving at the view, and we discussed this earlier, that because of the paucity, really, or the fact that the evidence against Barry George wasn't really that weighty, it was quite light, in fact, that he probably didn't do it, which begs the big question, who did?
Well, where I would start, and I'm not a police officer, but where I would start is they were able to identify 140 people with what they called an unhealthy interest in Jill Dando. Now, I mean, I'm sure that they went to all those people. I'm sure they eliminated them. That's fine. But if you found 140, how many more are you likely to have missed? You really think you've ring-fenced them all? I think somebody with an unhealthy interest in Jill Dando is the path of most likely
who just happened to turn up at her house when she was there, and he had a gun, which isn't
or who made it his business to pass that way frequently enough to give himself a chance of seeing her and killing her. I mean, I can't stress enough that, weird though Barry George is, there is absolutely no evidence that he's that sort of person. There was nothing about him or contents of this dump of a flat he lived in where nothing was sorted. So if he'd ever had anything about her, it would have been in there and lost in the morass of material.
I think that's part of his problem.
No evidence.
I think that's part of his problem, really, that he is weird. He was considered to be a bit of a local nutter, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's a murderer. Alan, do you have any view on this? Who do you think killed Jill Dando?
Well, again, I've got a scientific perspective, but just firstly mention the fact that this crime happened, is it 7, 8 years ago now?
Yeah.
Obviously, if anybody were to be arrested now, the chance of any forensic association is practically non-existent, unless obviously the individual left some DNA at the crime scene, for example. But again, it was outside non-ideal conditions.
So what you're saying is, unless somebody comes forward or they have a new lead, and Barry George, in the event that his conviction is quashed, it's very unlikely, in your view, that anybody will ever be convicted for this crime.
I totally agree. The difficulty being now, it was difficult 10 months after the incident. To think it's now 7, 8 years afterwards, from a forensic point of view, a complete nightmare. We'd have to rely on something having left at the crime scene, by that individual, whether it be a footmark or blood or whatever, hair, for example. So that's a possibility. We can't dismiss that. But in terms of what the mechanism or the reasons behind somebody committing this crime, as Brian has said, we don't know. But there's obviously all sorts of good suggestions as to where to start looking.
Let's explore one potential piece of evidence in the small amount of time that we've got left, which was the firearm actually used in the commission of the offence. What evidence was adduced as to what that was and where the likely source of that weapon?
Well, it's very difficult to link, believe it or not, difficult to link firearm discharge residue with a particular firearm. Now, in this particular case,
because gunpowder is gunpowder?
Well, it's the residue of it, yeah. I mean, obviously, it's all components. Ultimately, the particles that emerge are a mixture of all things within the firearm, whether it be the cartridge, the internal mechanisms, the primer, accelerant, etc. So there's all these sort of chemicals that swim together. So in this particular case, there was no firearm, which was another problem. They got a firearm particle, which they could analyse, but they couldn't link it to an actual firearm itself. But in terms of the firearm and the use of the firearm, then I'm not too sure, from my information, how much information was gleaned about the type of firearm used. I don't know where Brian can...
They were able to establish that it was a gun that had been tampered with. As I say, it was a 9mm short pistol with a smooth bore. Now, nothing like that is made by any factory. So the gun...
Does that mean
it may very well have been
a
decommissioned weapon
right.
That had been restored to use, or else it was, as you say, a blank firing weapon that had been adjusted.
So it sounds very much like it would be something that you might pick up, from local drug gangs, that sort of thing, from an illicit source, rather than something a professional hitman would carry around.
Yes, I think I'm about to Alan on the expertise on how you would actually get hold of one of these, but I gather that there are now a lot in circulation. I'm not sure it was so common back in 1999.
And as far as the police are concerned, the Metropolitan Police, what is their attitude now to this offence? Have you learned recently as to whether or not they remain of the view that they're satisfied that they've got the right man, or do they have considerable doubts behind the scenes?
No, I think they're satisfied they have the right man.
Yeah, okay. Well, Alan, thank you very much for coming in. Thank you for your insight into this very specialist area. Brian, a pleasure as well. Nice to talk to you about your book as well. That's all at the moment on Legal TV, on Innocent, on this very special programme about the upcoming appeal of Barry George concerning the dreadful murder of Jill Dando. This is Mark Watkins signing off. Until next time, stay lucky. See you soon. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.